Inside Alabama State Prison, overcrowding and control. Before the doors open, before the count is called, before the system even wakes up. There are already more people inside this prison than it was ever built to hold. In Alabama, some prisons operate at nearly double, or even triple, their intended capacity. Cells designed for one person now hold 2, sometimes 3. And in places like William E. Donaldson Correctional Facility and St. Clair Correctional Facility, overcrowding isn't just a statistic. It's a daily reality. A reality shaped by limited staff, rising violence, and a system that federal investigators have already called into question. But how did it get here? And more importantly, what does control look like in a prison system that may already be losing it?
Before we dive into today's powerful story, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more gripping tales. Your support helps us keep sharing these stories, and we wouldn't want you to miss any of the action. Now, let's get started.
The scale of the crisis. Alabama's prison system has been under pressure for decades. According to reports from the Alabama Department of Corrections, many major facilities have consistently operated far beyond their designed capacity. In some institutions, occupancy levels have exceeded 150 to 180%. That means nearly twice as many incarcerated individuals as the system was originally designed to manage. The consequences of that kind of overcrowding are not theoretical. They are measurable. Limited bed space, reduced access to medical care, and fewer correctional officers per inmate than in most other U.S. state systems. This imbalance creates an environment where control becomes harder to maintain, and risks increase for everyone inside. Federal investigation. In 2019, the U.S. Department of Justice released the findings of a major civil rights investigation into Alabama's men's prisons. The conclusion was direct. Conditions inside several facilities violated the Eighth Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, which protects against cruel and unusual punishment. The report documented patterns of violence, including assaults and homicides, that investigators said were linked to systemic failures. Among the key concerns, severe understaffing, chronic overcrowding, and a lack of effective supervision. The DOJ did not describe isolated incidents. It described a system-wide issue, one where the state struggled to provide even the minimum level of safety required under federal law. Life inside overcrowded cells. To understand overcrowding, you have to step inside the cells. Many of these spaces were originally built for a single occupant. A bed, a toilet, a sink. That was the design. But today, in some facilities, those same cells hold multiple people. Personal space becomes limited, almost non-existent. Schedules overlap. Tensions rise. And privacy, one of the few psychological buffers in incarceration, disappears completely. Experts in corrections and criminal justice have long noted that overcrowding increases stress levels, which can contribute to conflict. But the exact impact varies from facility to facility, and not all outcomes are fully documented. What is clear is that the physical design of these prisons has not kept pace with the number of people inside them. Staffing shortages. Overcrowding is only part of the equation. The other is staffing. Alabama has one of the lowest correctional officer-to-inmate ratios in the United States. In some cases, a single officer may be responsible for supervising dozens, or even hundreds, of inmates across large housing units. This creates what experts describe as blind spots. Areas where supervision is limited, where incidents may go unnoticed, or where response times are delayed. The U.S. Department of Justice report highlighted this issue repeatedly, noting that staffing shortages directly contributed to unsafe conditions. Recruitment and retention have been ongoing challenges. Low pay, high risk, and difficult working conditions make the job hard to sustain. And as staffing declines, the burden on remaining officers increases. Violence and control. With overcrowding and understaffing combined, control becomes more complex. The DOJ investigation found that violence, both inmate-on-inmate and inmate-on-staff, was a serious and ongoing concern. Homicides inside Alabama prisons have been documented in multiple years. However, the full extent of unreported incidents remains unclear. Some reports suggest that not all assaults are officially recorded. Others indicate delays in reporting. These claims vary and are not always independently verified. What is confirmed is that maintaining order in an overcrowded environment requires more than physical infrastructure. It requires systems that can respond quickly, consistently, and fairly. And when those systems are stretched, the consequences can escalate. The role of prison gangs. In environments where formal control is limited, informal systems often emerge. Prison gangs are one of those systems. They can influence daily life inside facilities, affecting everything from housing arrangements to access to resources. but the exact level of control varies. Some reports indicate that gangs play a significant role in maintaining order within certain areas. Others suggest their influence is overstated, because much of this activity happens outside official documentation. Many details remain unconfirmed. What is known is that overcrowding and understaffing can create conditions where unofficial power structures become more visible, and sometimes, more influential. Legal action and lawsuits. The conditions inside Alabama's prisons have not gone unchallenged. Following its investigation, the U.S. Department of Justice filed a lawsuit against the state in 2020. The claim that Alabama failed to protect incarcerated individuals from violence and harm. The case focused on systemic issues, overcrowding, understaffing, and inadequate supervision. Legal proceedings have continued over the years, with ongoing debates about responsibility, funding, and reform. At the same time, advocacy groups have pushed for changes, citing both humanitarian concerns and constitutional obligations. But legal action alone does not immediately change conditions on the ground. Reform, when it happens, tends to move slowly. The human impact. Behind every statistic is a person. Overcrowding affects more than numbers. It affects daily life. Access to healthcare can become delayed. Mental health services may be limited. Rehabilitation programs, education, job training, can be harder to access when resources are stretched thin. Families on the outside feel the impact too. Long wait times, limited visitation, and uncertainty about safety. While not every individual experiences the system in the same way, the overall pressure affects nearly everyone inside it. Overcrowding, understaffing, violence, legal battles. These are not isolated issues. They are connected. And they raise a deeper question: if the system is under this much pressure, how does it maintain control at all? Or does it? What control means in prison? In any prison system, control is the foundation. It's what separates order from chaos. At its most basic level, control means structure, scheduled movements, monitored spaces, clear authority, and predictable routines. But in overcrowded systems like those in Alabama, maintaining that structure becomes significantly more difficult. Because control isn't just about rules. It depends on resources, staff, infrastructure, and the ability to respond quickly when something goes wrong. When those elements are stretched thin, control becomes less visible and less consistent. Daily routine under pressure. A typical day inside an Alabama state prison follows a strict routine. Wake-up calls, head counts, meal distribution, work assignments, limited recreation. Each movement is supposed to be supervised, each transition controlled. But when facilities operate above capacity, schedules become harder to manage. Delays increase. Crowding intensifies during movement periods. And even routine activities, like lining up for meals, can become points of tension. Because when too many people are moving through spaces not designed for them, the system begins to strain. Lockdowns as a control tool. One of the most common tools used to maintain control is the lockdown. During a lockdown, movement is restricted. Inmates are confined to their cells or dorm areas. Programs stop. Work assignments pause. Lockdowns can be triggered by specific incidents, like violence or contraband discoveries. But they can also be used more broadly, as a way to stabilize conditions when staffing levels are too low to safely manage normal operations. In Alabama, extended lockdowns have been reported in multiple facilities. However, the exact duration and frequency vary, and not all details are consistently documented. What is known is that while lockdowns can reduce immediate risks, they also come with consequences. The effects of prolonged lockdown. When lockdowns extend beyond short periods, their impact becomes more complex. Access to outdoor time is reduced. Educational and rehabilitation programs are suspended. Medical visits may be delayed or limited. Mental health experts have noted that prolonged confinement can increase stress, anxiety, and other psychological challenges. But the full extent of these effects varies between individuals and facilities. Some reports from advocacy groups suggest that extended lockdowns have been used more frequently in overcrowded systems. Others emphasize that lockdowns are sometimes necessary for safety. What remains clear is that lockdowns are not a long-term solution. They are a response to instability, not a replacement for control. Supervision gaps. In an ideal system, every housing unit would have consistent, direct supervision. Officers present. Movement monitored. Incidents addressed quickly. But in Alabama's prisons, staffing shortages create gaps. Areas where supervision is limited. Times when fewer officers are available than required. The DOJ investigation pointed to these gaps as a major factor in unsafe conditions. Because when supervision decreases, The ability to enforce rules decreases with it. And in those moments, control can shift. Not always dramatically, but enough to change the balance inside a facility. Informal control structures. When formal control weakens, informal systems can take its place. Inside prisons, these systems often develop around groups. Sometimes based on shared backgrounds. Sometimes based on protection. Sometimes based on influence. These structures are not officially recognized, and much of their activity is not documented in public records. But multiple reports and studies suggest that in overcrowded and understaffed environments, informal authority can become more visible. In some cases, it may even help maintain order in the absence of sufficient staff. In others, it can contribute to conflict. The exact balance is difficult to measure, because much of it exists outside official oversight. Contraband and control. Another challenge in maintaining control is contraband. Unauthorized items, such as mobile phones, drugs, or weapons, have been reported in correctional facilities across the United States, including Alabama. The presence of contraband can increase risks. It can facilitate communication beyond supervision. And in some cases, it can contribute to organized activity within facilities. Alabama officials have acknowledged the issue and conducted searches and enforcement actions. But like many aspects of prison life, the full scale of contraband circulation is difficult to quantify. What is confirmed is that overcrowding and limited staffing make detection more challenging, and enforcement more complex. Use of segregation. Segregation, sometimes referred to as solitary confinement, is another tool used to maintain control. It involves separating individuals from the general population, often for disciplinary or safety reasons. In Alabama, segregation units exist within several facilities. The conditions and duration of confinement can vary. Federal investigators and advocacy groups have raised concerns about how segregation is used, particularly in systems already facing overcrowding. Critics argue that overuse can create additional mental health challenges. Officials, on the other hand, maintain that segregation is sometimes necessary to manage high-risk situations. As with many aspects of the system, the reality is complex, and not always fully documented in public detail. Technology and surveillance. Technology plays an increasing role in prison control. Surveillance cameras, electronic monitoring systems, centralized control rooms. These tools are designed to extend oversight beyond physical staff presence. In Alabama, some facilities have incorporated modern surveillance systems, but infrastructure varies widely. Older prisons may lack updated technology, and even where systems exist, they require personnel to monitor and respond. Technology can support control, but it cannot replace it, especially in environments where human resources are already limited. When control breaks down, despite systems, routines, and enforcement strategies, there are moments when control breaks down. Incidents that escalate faster than response times allow. Situations where supervision gaps become critical. The DOJ investigation documented cases where violence occurred in areas with limited oversight, where response delays were a factor, and where outcomes could have been different under stronger conditions. Not every incident is the same. Not every outcome is predictable. But together, they form a pattern. One that raises ongoing questions about whether the current system can sustain control under existing pressures. Control inside a prison is never static. It shifts. It adapts. And sometimes, it fails. In Alabama, the challenge isn't just maintaining control. It's rebuilding it. In the next chapter, we examine the state's response. New prison construction. Policy changes. And the question at the center of it all, can the system be fixed? Or is it already too far stretched? A system under pressure to change. By the early 2020s, the pressure on Alabama's prison system had reached a turning point. Federal investigations, lawsuits, public scrutiny, and years of documented overcrowding and understaffing. Together, they created a situation the state could no longer ignore. Officials acknowledged that many of Alabama's prisons were outdated, some built decades ago, with designs that no longer match modern correctional standards. The question was no longer whether change was needed, but how far that change would go. The plan for new prisons. In response, Alabama proposed one of the most significant prison construction efforts in its history. A plan to build new, large-scale correctional facilities, often referred to as mega prisons. The goal: replace multiple aging prisons with fewer, more modern institutions. Facilities designed with updated security systems, improved surveillance, and layouts intended to reduce blind spots and improve supervision. State officials argued that newer infrastructure would help address long-standing issues tied to overcrowding and control. But not everyone agreed on the solution. Funding and controversy. The construction plan came with a high cost, estimated in the hundreds of millions of dollars. Funding proposals included public financing and lease agreements with private developers. Supporters described the investment as necessary, a long overdue modernization of a failing system. Critics raised concerns about cost, about transparency, and about whether new buildings alone could solve deeper structural problems. Some advocacy groups argued that without sentencing reform and population reduction, overcrowding could continue, even in new facilities. The debate remains ongoing. Staffing reforms. Alongside construction plans, Alabama has taken steps to address staffing shortages. Efforts have included increased recruitment campaigns, salary adjustments, and expanded training programs for correctional officers. But challenges remain. Correctional work is demanding. Retention rates have historically been low, and rebuilding a workforce takes time. Officials have stated that improving staffing levels is essential to restoring control, because without enough trained personnel, even the most modern facility can face the same risks as the old ones. Federal oversight and legal pressure. While reforms move forward, federal oversight continues. The lawsuit filed by the U.S. Department of Justice remains a central force shaping the system's future. The case focuses on whether Alabama can provide constitutionally adequate conditions for those in its custody. Legal proceedings of this scale can take years, and outcomes are not always immediate. But they carry significant weight, because federal intervention has, in other states, led to court-ordered reforms, monitoring, and long-term oversight. In Alabama, the final outcome remains unresolved: reducing overcrowding. At the center of the issue is a simple but complex question: how do you reduce overcrowding? Some policy discussions have focused on sentencing reform, alternatives to incarceration, and parole system adjustments. These approaches aim to reduce the number of people entering, or remaining in, the prison system. But changes in policy take time. They require legislative action, and they often involve broader debates about public safety and criminal justice. As of now, no single solution has fully addressed the population imbalance. And without reducing that pressure, other reforms may face limits. Conditions today. Today, conditions inside Alabama's prisons continue to evolve. Some improvements have been reported. Construction projects are in progress. Staffing efforts are ongoing. But many of the core challenges remain. Overcrowding has not been eliminated. Staffing shortages still exist. And the balance between control and instability continues to shift. Because large systems do not change overnight. They change gradually, and sometimes unevenly. The bigger question. Alabama's prison system is not unique in facing these challenges. Across the United States, correctional systems have grappled with overcrowding, staffing, and reform. But Alabama has become a focal point. A case study in what happens when pressure builds over time, and when solutions must address not just infrastructure, but the system itself. Because prisons are not isolated environments. They reflect policies, decisions, and priorities made far beyond their walls. Inside Alabama's prisons, overcrowding and control are not separate issues. They are connected, each one shaping the other. And together, they define the daily reality of the system. Reform is underway, but its outcome is still uncertain. Because real change depends on more than new buildings or new policies. It depends on whether the system can adapt before the pressure builds again. If you found this documentary insightful, make sure to subscribe to Life Behind Bars for more fact-based investigations into the world behind prison walls. Every story we tell is built on real records, real systems, and real consequences. And there's always more beneath the surface.